Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on entrepreneurship, the inspiration module, as I call it. I do this as part of an industry organization called My Electrical Community. And just as a bit of a background, My Electrical Community is a peer-to-peer business and social network for individuals with an electrical background. My guest today is Rashid Kotwal. Rashid has had over 16 years of experience. And Rashid, why don't you provide a bit of an introduction to yourself and your journey to date?
Okay. Hi, Ray, and hi, everybody watching this. Ray, I'm a mechanical engineer by background and worked in the IT industry for some 20 years before starting our own business just after the dot-com bust, if you like, in 2000. And for the last 15 odd years, coming up to 16 years, we've run a business coaching, marketing and sales consultancy that specializes in helping small to medium businesses grow their client base, attract, retain, and convert good, high-quality clients. Our speciality is working with people who have high-value products or services. So we don't work in the commodity space. You've got to have something that's either complex, difficult to explain, either from a technical point of view, or it could be a service, or it could be manufacturing. So that's basically what we do.
Okay. Rashid, given the fact that you worked with a lot of businesses, entrepreneurs, how have you seen the definition of entrepreneurship? So what do you see as the definition of being an entrepreneur?
Look, I think the definition of an entrepreneur, I think that's an interesting question, because I think the definition would be different for different people. I think people start businesses for different reasons, but I think the core attitude, I'd much rather talk about an attitude rather than a definition of an entrepreneur. You've got to have an attitude that, yes, I'm going to make this work, and yes, I'm going to go out there, and yes, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this thing work. But also have an attitude that I don't know it all, and that I will get help, and get help sooner rather than later. I think you have to have a belief in yourself as an entrepreneur, and you have to, in my opinion, want to make a difference. And it really, you start out, most of us start out on this journey because we want to have a better life in some way. But at some point, I think you also have to realize that you need to do more than just something for yourself. I think that makes sense.
No, that's fair enough. What prompted, of the different examples of the different individuals that you've had come through your business, what are some of the examples of why people start a business? So, could you give me some examples from?
Look, there are lots of different reasons. I think a lot of people start a business because they might have been retrenched. They have a midlife crisis and they think, what am I going to do now? Other people have a really good idea and they think that, yes, let me go and start a business. The third category is what Michael Gerber out of the E-Myth would say is the technician who becomes the business owner come entrepreneur. So the attitude is, I'm very good at what I do. Therefore, I might be a very good mechanic. I might be a very good engineer. I might be a very good whatever, baker, candlestick maker. And therefore, I'm going to be very good at the business of making candlesticks or fixing cars. The reality is actually very different. So people come into this for various reasons. Whether they stick at it or not really comes down to their own personality. Number one, whether they have what it takes to stick through it, because this journey, as you well know, is not an easy one. There are ups and downs. There are very few safety nets. It's not like going to a job and getting paid, every week.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got to have the right attitude if you want to become an entrepreneur, and know that, yes, it's going to take a lot of hard work and you're going to need a lot of support.
Do you feel entrepreneurship can be taught, or is it more an ingrained attitude?
Look, I think it's probably a mixture of both. You've got to have the ingrained attitude that, yes, you are going to do whatever is necessary within reason to make this thing work, and also realize that there is a lot of skill involved that does need to be taught, and you do have to learn it. None of us were born entrepreneurs, or very few people were born entrepreneurs. It usually comes out of some form of necessity, shall we say. But then it comes down to who do you surround yourself with that's going to be able to help you on the journey, because it's a very lonely place if you want to do it all yourself. And there are only so many hours in the day, and there are only so many things that you can do and do well. So it then becomes a question of, do I have the attitude that allows me to take on board other ideas and learn new skills? I think that's what it comes down to. It is a combination of innate ability and attitude, as well as the ability to be coached.
It's interesting. I've been talking to some other entrepreneurs in terms of their journeys, and what one of them said was interesting. He said, look, it's not something that as much can be taught, but as much the individual needs to want to learn. If the individual has a desire to learn, that's a lot better than them actually going and being taught, because you can teach anything, but if that individual doesn't have the desire to absorb, to throw them in, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that. I think it's a question of wanting to learn, but it's also a question of taking action. There's a lot of people want to learn all sorts of things, but what do you do with that? It's a case of take massive action. If you want to get massive results, you've got to take massive action, and there's no way around that.
I agree. I think one of the basics of entrepreneurship is you're constantly moving.
Yeah, and also realize that you're constantly going to be making mistakes, and you need to have, if it comes down to the attitude, you've got to have the attitude that, yes, I'd rather make a mistake and go and learn from that mistake and move on and say, okay, well, that was a mistake, I won't do that one again, rather than sit there paralyzed by fear and never take a risk and say, there are so many people, as they say, that, who die with the music still within them. So my thing would be, if you've got a good idea, and if you're willing to take a risk, and I'm not saying take silly risks, I think you have to calculate these things out and say, okay, is there a market for this idea? Am I going to be able to sell this thing? Does somebody actually want to buy it? Because just because it's a good idea doesn't mean people want to actually pay money for it. Then absolutely go out and do something with it. Because what would you rather? Would you rather, hit the end of your life and think, oh, well, I wish I had done something? Or would you rather hit the end of your life and say, well, I did that, I tried that. Maybe that one didn't work, but maybe something else did. How do you know what the journey is going to be unless you take that step?
Well said. No, that's great. Given the experience that you've had over a length of time, would you recommend that people, before they start, have a set of success criteria that they're trying to head towards, so that they're constantly monitoring and measuring themselves towards whatever success? It's almost like when you're at work, someone else defines your KPIs. Is it essential that you do this, even if it's not formally, but informally, so that rather than just leave work because you hate work and then just plunge yourself into it, would you consider the fact that defining success criteria, whatever that is, at the start is?
Absolutely. I'd absolutely agree with that, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. You see, there are two types of motivation. There are the people who move away from things and they're running away from something. They're the people who move towards things, and we all fall somewhere in that continuum. And sometimes we run away from things, and sometimes we want to move towards something that we really want. The problem with moving away and running away from something, like you hate your job, you hate your boss, you hate your whatever, is, and you leave that, but you are by definition running towards something. Whenever you're running away from something, you're running somewhere, but you're looking behind you. You don't really know that you're going to smack into the tree in front of you. So if you are going to go start your business because you hate whatever you're doing now, I absolutely agree. You better have a good definition for what success is going to look like, or at least some milestones along the way. It's like getting in your car and just driving aimlessly for the sake of driving aimlessly. That might be fine when you want to sit, get some space, or you want to think, whatever. But let's say you're in Sydney and you want to get to Melbourne. Well, if you didn't know you wanted to get to Melbourne, you'd end up anywhere. And you've then got to look at the road signs along the way to say, yes, am I meeting any of these milestones that I set for myself, or am I fooling myself? Am I fooling myself thinking that this is all working when it's not actually all working? Then I think it comes down to, do I have the guts to say, okay, this wasn't working, maybe this isn't working, maybe I need to do something else? I think another analogy that comes to mind is if anybody trades on the stock market, there's this tendency to follow a bad decision down the gurgler, if you like. I made a decision to buy a particular stock, and even though the stock is going down, I'm not going to sell it because I don't have that outside view on this thing, and I get caught up in this bias of my decision, if that makes sense. And I think it's the same thing with entrepreneurs. You can get caught up in the fact that I've made this decision, but I'm not seeing reality for what it is. That's why I think it's very important that you actually work with, or you have some form of external sounding board, whether it's paid or it's free, it doesn't really matter, but you've got to have somebody that you respect who's going to call you on your shit and say, hey, listen, that was crap.
Yep.
Because it's very easy for us to fool ourselves.
Yep. Besides, I guess, having a sense of direction in terms of where the individuals are heading, which is critical. If someone was listening to this and had a desire to step into business and had not, well, what are some of the other aspects that they need to have at the back of their mind before heading down that path?
Look, I think the number one thing I would say to anybody is make sure you've got enough financial backing behind you. Because there is nothing worse than worrying about where your next dollar is going to come from and how you're going to pay the next mortgage bill. Okay?
Yeah.
So if you are going to go down this path, realize it's going to take a lot more money and a lot more time. It'll probably take you 3 times as much money and 3 times as much time as you first thought, if not more. Therefore, get those ducks lined up in a row and say, okay, how am I actually going to survive while I put this thing into place? And do I have support structures? Does my family support me anyway? Because if your family, let's say that your spouse does not support you, and there's no other form of income, well, it's going to lead to some difficult conversations in your relationship. Let's put it that way. And I think those things have to be taken into account. But if you firmly believe in something and you can then take people on that journey with you, you're going to have a lot more success.
Besides the cash flow, which is important, but cash flow, you're talking almost about a starting kitty. But what are some of the other aspects? So I'd imagine in a large business, you've got a marketing department, a sales department, you've got finance, you've got operations and administration, you've got communications that deals with the outside world. Someone's heading into small business, starting by themselves. How would they go around, I guess, making sure all of those boxes have the potential to be ticked, leave alone being ticked?
Okay. So one particular resource I would highly recommend is the E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber, who talks about exactly this. And he talks about people who have an entrepreneurial seizure. They have this moment of entrepreneurial madness, as he puts it, where they throw away their job and they start a business, and then they suddenly find that they just bought themselves another job. But Michael Gerber is very big into systems and systemizing. So he says, look, even though you might be doing all of these things yourself, you need to realize you have to have finance handled, you need to have marketing and sales handled, you need to have production handled, you need to have HR handled. And you need to define those roles and responsibilities. Even if you're doing them yourself, you still have to define them. And then you put on different hats while you're doing the different things. And then when you start getting a little bit bigger and you start needing external help, you can slot somebody in to do that. So it is important to define the various roles. But the one thing I would say to anybody in business, the biggest mistake that we all make is that we think we're in a technical business. No matter what business we're in, we think we're in some form of producing something, but you're not. You're actually in the business of marketing, whatever it is you produce. Because if you can't market that, and if you can't sell, no matter how good you are at producing it, you're never going to get any clients. And so the one thing that I would say to anybody who wants to start a business is really get some help in setting up your marketing. And by setting up marketing, I am not talking about printing business cards and getting a logo and getting a letterhead. Those things, on the priority of things, they would be way down on -50. Yeah. But most people do that first.
Mm-hmm.
What I'd be more interested in is going out and talking to people and saying, are they actually going to spend money on my product?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can I actually sell something?
Mm-hmm.
Because if I can sell something, I can solve every other problem. And nobody is going to buy based on my logo, no matter what anybody says.
Yeah, yeah. Even after doing market research, so let's say someone's gone out there and done their market research and established that a significant proportion, let's say they've researched and had 100 sample size, so that's a reasonable sample size. 70% of them have said whatever product or service the individual is about to launch into has premise.
Mm-hmm.
Does that then actually guarantee that there will be a market for what this individual's about to head into?
No, it doesn't. Because in my experience, people will say, oh, that's really nice. The only arbiter is whether they take money out of their wallets and pay it.
Exactly right.
Focus groups are focus groups. People say all sorts of things. But if you actually said, take your wallet out right now, give me your credit card and pay for this thing, and if they actually do that, then you know that you've got something. Anything else is honestly, it's false hope. And from that point of view, you might be better starting with something small to just then move up the scale.
Right. Okay. Not every individual that heads into small business has a sales orientation. Mm-hmm. How important is a sales orientation towards the success of a small business?
Let's just say it's critical. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If your job as the business owner is to be the chief salesperson, no matter what anybody else says. And yes, you might be able to get somebody else to do it later on. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you horror stories of people in reasonable sized businesses who've hired salespeople who spend a year or 2 years and never sold anything. Okay, and these people have been paid sometimes 6-figure salaries when not selling anything. And I've walked into the business and gone, why are they still here?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your job as the business owner is in effect be the chief evangelist, if you like. You're the person who needs to be able to go out and convince people that you can go out and actually sell and actually bring business in the door. You can't rely on somebody else to do this, not in the initial stages.
What if they don't have that ability, motivation? The reason I say that is it's one thing to say that every individual needs to be involved, but it's not a natural skill. I know that because when I started my own business, I thought I'm reasonably extroverted. In the initial stages, I thought, and in fact, when I was working, I took the opportunity while I was working for a large business to do a stint in sales to try and build up that skill while I was working for a larger company because I knew it was important. So I tried to prep myself up by getting into sales for a short period of time. But when I started to get into business, the aspect of facing rejection 95 times out of 100, which 97, 90, so you go and approach people you're hearing a lot of no's to a few yeses, but from the few yeses you'll actually start to build a nucleus. So it doesn't come easily. Now, for someone like myself who's reasonably extroverted, it was tough. Now, I'm just thinking to myself, if that person doesn't have that innate trait, do you believe that collaboration perhaps might be the way to do it? So if they don't have, if they're good at something, maybe collaborate with someone else and form an equity partnership with someone else that can go out there to the sales? Or do you think that it's so important that they've got to push that boundary where they are and actually get into it themselves?
Look, I think you're right. You can certainly have a collaboration and an equity partnership, but I also think that you do need to get past your own comfort zone. Mm-hmm. But it's not. People will say sales is a numbers game. Sales is, to a certain extent, yes, okay, it is a numbers game from the point of view. Yes, you do have to talk to a lot of people. But if you actually get help to set up a decent marketing system is designed to have prospects, either find you or you find them in some way and have them raise their hands and say, yes, I'm interested, so that you can start nurturing them down the journey towards becoming a client. And that way, when you're selling, are really only talking to people who have in some way qualified themselves in. And you've also qualified other people out through the marketing system. And this is something that most people don't realize. Most people go, head over heels, and they just say, look, I'm going to open the phone book and start calling people. And that to me is a waste of time, generally speaking. And so, and marketing isn't this big, complex, difficult thing that, you don't have to have a 3-year marketing degree to do marketing. In fact, those sorts of marketing degrees are very good for large organizations, but they're not good for small business. Small business, we have to be nimble, we have to be quick. Your website is important. You can run online advertising that gives you a result very, very quickly if you know what you're doing. And this is the caveat, you have to know what you're doing. And that's where you would get help, yes. And then learn how to deal with the people who come into the funnel so that you can have that structured sales conversation. So it's not hard, but you have to do it.
I'm going to ask you more of a sales-related question.
Sure.
In today's environment where there is a lot of clutter, you get bombarded with, sort of so much information. I feel it's almost the norm that when you call someone, you're going to get their voicemail, or you're going to get a gatekeeper. So it's one thing for people to push past their resistance to try and talk to the decision maker, but to get to the decision maker, I think that's actually the skill to try and get through the gatekeeper to be able to talk to the decision maker. Of course, then to get the decision maker's attention quickly and go out there and I guess present your value proposition is equally important. But what would you suggest that in this day and age, when all you're facing are voicemails and gatekeepers, how would you get past that? It's more a sales question, but how would you tackle that?
Okay, look, there are a couple of my attitude is you never go through a gatekeeper. You always enlist the gatekeeper's help. Okay, so if you were going to go down the track of say, let's say that you want to target company X, and you know that company X is likely to be facing a problem that you can solve. Okay, so and you figure that the best person to talk to in company X might be the CFO. So how would you go about finding the CFO? Well, you've got a couple of choices. You can go on LinkedIn, you can do a Google search. It may well be on their website, as to what the person's name is. So if you were going to go down the track of phoning somebody, and I wouldn't necessarily suggest going down that track, but let's say that you went down that track. What I would do is I would phone the company, and I would probably get the receptionist and say, could I speak to Mr. Whatever or Mrs. Whatever? Okay, and they'd either ask what it's about, or they'd say, yes, I'll put you through. But what I'd say is I'd give them a little bit of a spiel. I'd say, look, I've got a particular issue that I know that they're trying to solve, and could I speak to them? If you are speaking to the person's PA and you explain what it is that you're trying to do and the value proposition and why you're calling, and you enlist their help, the chances are actually very good that the PA is going to put you through and help you. But if you try and just push through the PA and say, listen, you're just whatever, a PA down there, and who the hell cares about you? You're not going to get very far, because they are the gatekeeper. They are there to protect the boss. Okay? So that would be one piece of advice. But another way of doing this is, if they're on LinkedIn, for instance, send them a LinkedIn connection request, or follow them for a while and see what they're posting. If they're on Twitter, for instance, see what questions they might be asking, see what they're posting in various LinkedIn groups that they might be belong to. I know it might sound like a bit of stalking, but they don't know that you're stalking them. And once you see that, yes, they're interested in certain things, you could send them a message and say, listen, I noticed you asked a particular question about something, and here's an answer to that, or here are some resources that I could possibly, that could possibly help. Not necessarily me, but there are some resources that can help. And if you start building up that relationship, because you're perceived as someone who can help, reciprocity kicks in, and they're more likely to actually respond to something when you say, listen, oh, by the way, I've got another idea I'd like to talk to you about. Okay, so that is a way. Now, this is not instant. It is going to take a while, to build up that relationship and build up that rapport with somebody. The other way, of course, is to advertise, so that if they're looking for something, then they see your ad, they come to your website, they sign up for some free information that they can download, where they go on your newsletter list, whatever, and you keep feeding them with stuff, and eventually they either decide to buy, refer you on, or go away. Okay, so they know. There are two different ways of doing it. One is outbound, one is inbound.
It's interesting you talk about stalking, but when I was setting up my business, I was trying to get in touch with what was a managing director of a publicly listed company, and it's impossible to get that through a gatekeeper. So what I did was I did some market research. I did some Google searches, and I found he was actually presenting at a conference, and the cost of attending that conference wasn't that huge, and it related to my field. So I purchased the price of going to the conference. Through that, I made it a point to research the topic he was asking, and made sure I was the first to put my hand up to ask a question when they throw the floor open to questions. Got his attention, and then after that went and spoke to him and managed to pin him down, literally. But the fact is that I think in running a small business, being creative and thinking outside the box doesn't hurt.
I think that's an excellent example, actually, because you took the time, you spent the money to go to the conference. This is marketing money at the end of the day, and it's time. But you knew who the target was. You took an interest in him. You took an interest in the topic. You made sure that you put your hand up. You made sure you spoke to him. Now, whether he remembered you after that or not, you could still send him a follow-up and say, "Hey, listen, I spoke to you at the conference. This is what we spoke about. And can we spend 15, 20 minutes on the phone, or whatever it is?" Okay, and then progress it from there. So we all want to be flattered. We all want to know that somebody took an interest in what we were doing. Absolutely, that's a great strategy.
Given the fact that we are doing our research on who we want to target, how important is it for us to have a good Google presence? So, to what extent is it important for the person in small business to start getting their name out through whatever they do, so that when someone researches, so if you're going to meet someone, they will Google you as much as you Google.
Absolutely, and I think that is absolutely critical, and therefore, this is something I would say, if you've got a Facebook profile, lock it down. If you, especially if I look at the younger generation, our sort of kids who are 25, 26, up to 30, whatever. Some of the stuff that goes on Facebook, people legitimately say that you could lose a job because of something you posted on Facebook. Because an employer or a business partner or a potential prospect client is going to look, and they're going to look at what you do. So be very careful to make sure that the stuff you put up there is positive, and anything else is locked down if you're going to do that. The other side of it is you need to become an authority figure in your field. And the best way to become an authority figure is to start publishing material on whatever the topic is that you're an expert in. And when I say publishing, I mean LinkedIn, you can put LinkedIn posts up, you have your own blog, you can put stuff into other online forums, Google+. If there are industry portals that accept submissions, put them up there. Get yourself interviewed by other people who might be in the field. It all raises your profile. So then when somebody comes, they go, "Oh, wow, this guy's really out there."
It's interesting you say that, because I'm reflecting on my journey as well. One of the things I did, and I've actually found someone young that's helping out with my electrical community, is this girl's actually gone out there and helped us with organizing some of our events. And through organizing some of our events, she's been able to raise her profile a lot more than the other individuals that have come through and attended some of our mentoring and networking sessions. She's done that free. She's done that, I guess, out of her own desire. But she's taken that initiative, that as she's gone out there and engaged, she's used the opportunity to work with an industry organization to engage with the stakeholders. So while she's helping us, she's also helping herself. And I guess, how would you say to the idea that at the end of the day, you've got to go out there and engage your stakeholders, because they will only buy if you build a relationship. And I call it almost building a spider web. You build a web around all of you. It's almost like your prey is the fly, and you build a web around them, and you build a web enough so that you approach them from different angles, but in a manner such that that you're actually getting to understand your target audience, and they get to understand you. How important is that?
I think that's a very good way of putting it. Absolutely, that's a good analogy, and full marks to your to this lady for doing that, because that's a very smart thing to do. Because you get noticed. You get noticed for being out there and being active, and for being helpful. And who are they going to call? Who are they going to call? They're not going to call somebody who sits in the corner.
Given the fact that LinkedIn is an important part of knowing more about the individual you're going to be approaching, how important would a recommendation from someone that's mutually known to them and you be relevant to be able to get through the gatekeeper? So if you call up and say, look, I'd like to talk to Rashid. Rashid was, I was asked to talk to Rashid by Joe Blog. And so when she talks to Rashid and says, look, there's a guy called Ray, he wants to talk to you, but Valley was referred to by XYZ. Would that help get through the gatekeeper?
Look, I think it all helps, and certainly if the gatekeeper knows who the other person is, absolutely. And I think it's, once again, the recommendations do help, and every so often I'll have somebody make a request on LinkedIn and say, can you introduce me to so-and-so? And I go, fine, I'll introduce you to so-and-so. The one thing I would say, though, is I've never yet heard back from the person who asked for the introduction as to how it went, which I think is a little bit rude. If you've asked me for an introduction, then at least have the courtesy to say thank you when I do it. Okay?
Yeah.
I naturally do introduce people, but I will normally just do that via email. I'll say, I know that somebody should meet somebody else, and I'll send them both an email saying, hey, listen, here's an introduction, take it from there. And I usually get a thank you from both of them. And I think that's just etiquette. But introductions do help, absolutely, if you can leverage it. But just reach out to people. But I would still say, if you can find things that would help them, if you know that they're interested in something, you find you find that the person's interested in sailing, whether you are or not doesn't matter, but you see an interesting article on sailing in the type of sailing that they're interested in. You say, hey, listen, I saw this, I noticed you were interested in sailing, and I saw this, here you go. They'd appreciate it. So it's also about not necessarily just keeping to business, but figuring out what else this person is interested in. Is this person interested in a particular charity or a particular cause that you help out with?
When someone heads off and starts their own business, there are a few basic housekeeping things that they need to do, like setting up the ABN and things like that. Can you give just a brief on what are the sort of things they need to do when they set up their own business?
Okay, so obviously they're going to need an ABN, depending on who they're selling to and the threshold. They're going to need to register for GST. They're going to obviously need to do some form of bookkeeping. Now, I think a lot of people complicate a lot of these things. It really comes down to what you're selling. I mean, if you're selling hundreds of small items, then yes, you're probably going to need a general ledger which categorizes all of this and this, that, and the other. But if you're really selling high value services and you've got a handful of clients, well, excuse me, but you don't need another bookkeeper. Your husband or wife or you yourself could probably do it for quite a long time. Get it set up. Get a decent accountant who can help you once a year, make sure the tax goes in and you claim everything that you can possibly claim. Because I think that's where a lot of people fall down. The government will give you a lot of tax deductions if you know what you're doing. And the other thing is, depending on the sorts of business you're going into, there are lots of government grants that are available. If you're doing any sort of R&D, the government will throw a lot of money in your direction, especially if it's export-oriented R&D.
Okay. But when would you recommend someone establishes a PTY limited company and someone just sticks with an ABN number?
Look, I think that comes down to how big you want to get and where. It depends on it. Look, that's a very difficult question to answer. I think. I mean, we're not an ABN. We're not a PTY. We're just a partnership, and that suits us. The two of us, and we're a partnership, a legal partnership. I I think if you go down the PTY Limited, there's a lot more accounting to be done. It's also harder to extract your money out of the company without, the benefits one and half, six of one and half a dozen of the other. And I think you really need to have the advice of a good accountant to decide what you're going to do. I guess one of the other factors would be how likely are you to get sued? I know it's an awful thing to say, but I mean, it's reality. So if you are likely to get sued, then you are better off putting your assets into outside the organization, so that there's nothing for them to actually grab.
One of the things I actually discovered was if you've got a business name, the business name's only registered in the state that you're in. So someone, let's say you've gone out there, registered a business name, or whatever that is. You go out there, you develop your business model. It starts to earn some money. Someone could easily establish the same business name in Victoria, Western Australia, and they'd be within their rights to have exactly the same business name and leverage of your all of your hard work. But establishing a PTY Limited company gives you ownership of that brand or the name across Australia. So that was one thing that I discovered, that in setting up a business name as compared to setting up a PTY Limited company, you at least have. It's a bit like I have a business called Find All Electrical Jobs. Now, despite the fact that I had a PTY Limited company, I found someone overseas that actually set up exactly the same name, and I had to actually go out there and keep pursuing the fact that, look, this is my business model. You can't just copy my name.
Well, I guess that is a consideration, or I guess you could also register your business name in every state if you really wanted to. I think it really comes down to personal choice, as well as how you want to do your accounting. My thing would be get legal advice on that one.
Okay, that's fair enough. What are some of the joys of setting up your own business, and what are some of the challenges of setting up your own business? So it would seem to me that going into business must have its benefits, because there are challenges. We've seen them. I'd just like to get a sense of what have you seen to be some of the challenges from the businesses that you've helped, and what gets individuals to continue to be in business despite the challenges, which must be the joys.
I think it really comes down to the individual, but I mean, for most of us, it is a sense of freedom, of controlling our own destiny. However, the challenges in all businesses, the number one challenge would have to be cash flow. I think it doesn't matter how big the business is; it's always going to be cash flow. It's just a different level of cash flow. But the feeling of being in control of your own destiny, or being able to create something, or being able to go out there and make a difference, can be quite a big driver for a lot of people. And on the other side of it, a lot of us don't want to have the constriction of working for somebody else and being told what to do when we don't want to do it. However, with all freedom comes responsibility. So yes, you can have the freedom on one end, but the biggest challenge, I think, and this was something that I heard from New Zealand's largest liquidator, interestingly enough. He says, look, the biggest problem with small business is not cash flow. It's actually a lack of accountability. Because when you're in a job, you're always accountable to somebody, whether it's your boss who owns the company or it's the shareholders who own the company. You're always accountable. But the minute you put your shingle out and you become your own boss, who are you accountable to? And therefore, it's very easy to fool ourselves and think, okay, well, I'll do that tomorrow, and oh yeah, that doesn't really matter, when it does matter. And nobody holds you to your word. And I think that's going to be one of the big issues, the challenges that face us in small business. But if you can get past that and say, okay, I'm willing to be accountable to somebody external, whether it's a coach or it's a friend, not a friend. You really want somebody external who is going to keep you on the straight and narrow, preferably not your spouse. It's not good for the relationship unless they're in the business. But the highs, the fact that you can make a real difference. If you set up the business correctly and you structure it well, you can have holidays. You can make a lot of money. The downside is you might just divorce yourself another job. You know, so it's, you know, you really do have to be careful. And it comes down to structure, and it comes down to how you do this.
Would it be fair to say that when you get into small business, along with the alchemy of creating something out of nothing, you're also a risk manager? So you mentioned about cash flows. There was actually, I guess, a movement around, a while back around lean manufacturing. I would say lean cash flow management. So if you have a huge kitty of cash before you start, your own business, does it make you cash flow lazy? Is it worthwhile actually getting into small business with what you need? I was going to say rather than what you want, but I think actually by having a much larger kitty, does it make you not as creative about how to get the same solution from cheaper means? I don't know. Am I making my
possibly? Absolutely. If you've got, you can get complacent. You can think, oh yeah, there's lots of cash sitting there, and it could well be what happened with the .com. People funded all of this, and they bought into all of these companies, but these companies didn't actually produce anything. And at some point, well, it all goes away. I think there's a good lesson to be learned from that one. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think lean and mean is always good, but you don't want to be lean to the point that you're next to starving. Because if you look at Maslow's hierarchy, if you're at a survival level, you can't really think about anything else. So you've got to be beyond survival. You can't be creative if you're constantly stressed, wondering where the next dollar is going to come from. It really kills creativity.
Sure. How important is it to have an exit strategy so that you know when to exit? Because there are a lot of small businesses that are marginal, and they continue being marginal and almost running hobbies. Is it important to realize, look, what I'm doing is just not working, and moving on to another business? So having an exit strategy, whether it's another business, going back into work, when you set up your own business, is it important to have some exit strategy? Because otherwise you could keep going and bleeding, and you wouldn't even, because you're in it, you get so emotionally involved, you keep bleeding, so to speak. I mean, is it important?
We don't go into it thinking, okay, what's my exit strategy going to be, and what happens if it doesn't work? Most people go into business thinking, yes, I'm going to make a go of it. But you're absolutely right. I think whatever period of time, you need to have a good, cold, hard look at it and say, okay, is this thing really fulfilling the reasons that I got into it? But that'll only happen if you had clearly defined the reasons you wanted to get into it in the first place. But even further down the track, you could still sit down and say, okay, well, is this fulfilling my lifestyle? Is it fulfilling what I want to do? And what's the alternative? Maybe the alternative is I go and get another job. And I think, yes, it's a very valid point.
Rashid, one of the questions that I have for you is, when people are sitting in full-time work, quite often they feel they're in a secure job. And they consider the fact that when you're in business, that's a risk. Given the environment where we are in, where people are being made redundant, companies are merging, the whole environment is changing. To what extent is one either more or less risk than the other? So being in full-time work versus being in business, is there more or less risk in one or the other?
I think anybody who sits in full-time work thinking that they're safe is kidding themselves. I think in our parents' generation, my father worked for the same insurance company as an accountant for, I don't know, over 40 years, I think. And in those days, you could start off as literally the office boy, the mailman, the mail boy, ended up as the chairman of the board, which I've seen happen. I think those days are probably long gone to a large extent. It does happen, but to a large extent, they've gone. I think the average tenure these days for a CEO is what, 4 years, 3 years, 4 years. People certainly move jobs every 2, maybe 3 or 4 years. If I look back at my own corporate career, the number of waves of redundancies that we've been through over the years was staggering. You knew, the next round was going to come. Anybody our age who hasn't been made redundant at least once, I'd say almost impossible to find. Okay, so to answer your question, that's a long-winded way of answering the question to say there is no job security. You are at the whim of circumstances very often, and maybe they've got absolutely nothing to do with you. It's just the way it is. The other side of it, of course, is you start your own business, and now it's equally risky in its own way because, but at least you have control to a certain extent. You know, you can't control everything. You can't control the market. You can't control a whole bunch of things, but you at least can control the things that you can. And your job is to figure out what it is you can control, find a market that's likely to be growing, put in decent marketing and sales systems, a decent production system, and a way of keeping your clients, and then at least you have some control over what you're doing. And at least if something goes wrong, you only have yourself to blame it, in a way.
Yep.
So that's a long-winded answer to say, look, there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. But my thing would be that if you want to get out there and you want to have a go, then go out there and have a go, because you'll never know unless you try it. And there are plenty of businesses that do extremely well if they put in the right structures and they have the right attitude and they get the right help.
That actually brings me to the last question. If someone's sitting down listening to this talk, and I mean, I knew in terms of my own journey, there was a lot of stop starts. I wanted to get in business. I sort of dabbled in it, a little bit with full-time work, and it took me a while. It wasn't like I went cold turkey. So I didn't say, bang, I'm in business tomorrow. If someone was listening to this talk, and they had the seed, the desire to get into business, what would you tell them?
I'd say, look, I would say, if at all possible, hedge your bets. Okay. Start something on a part-time basis, and see how you go. But with the attitude that yes, you can make this thing work, or at least have some other form of income coming in for the lean times that will inevitably start and carry on for a while, unless you're extremely lucky. I mean, I have one ex-colleague who basically worked for a large IT company who decided to close down the whole division and gave all the clients to this. We're talking blue chip clients like Qantas, Westpac, and Combank, and so he went from nothing to a pretty successful business. And he said to me, after a year of being in business, he had about 11 or 12 employees, and we're not talking contractors, we're talking employees. And he said he had enough money in the bank to keep paying them for a year, to no more business coming. Now that is incredibly rare. Okay? You're not generally going to find your employer who's just going to have, out of the goodness of their heart, give you all their clients that they don't work with. So my thing would be, start small, build it up, don't jump in with both feet and say, hey, it's all or nothing. Okay. Have some form of backup plan where the money can keep coming in, so that you can actually be productive without worrying about where the next dollar is coming from.
A supplementary question to this then, if someone's going to be doing this while hedging their bets, how important would a business incubator be that could help them almost build a bridge to where they are heading? To what extent could a business incubator help those that can be in full-time work and do that with the help of a business incubator? And once that's starting to gather some momentum, give up work and get into business.
Look, I think that would be a very good idea if for anybody to start that way, because one of the things in being in business for yourself is it can be very lonely, as you well know. The people who are your friends and ex-colleagues who are still employed don't necessarily understand. Being in business is a completely different mindset, and what I would say that most people will find after they've been in business a while is that people who aren't in business really don't understand them in the way that other business owners will understand. Because people being employed don't face the same challenges. They face different challenges, but they don't face the same sort of visceral challenges that you do in business. And therefore, being in an incubator where there are other people going through the same stuff, but you also have the ability to be mentored by people running the incubator who can then put you in touch with, it's all about connections. Who can they put you in touch with? What's the growth of the network? I would say that would be absolutely critical. And if I had my time again, it would be something that I would have done. We basically started cold turkey. One day we were employed, next day we weren't. And believe me, that is a difficult route to go down.
And the challenge that I also faced when I did finally take the plunge was whatever capital you've got, you eat into pretty quickly. So and I think you said it's difficult thinking about strategy when you think about where your mortgage payment or whatever else that you know.
That's right. That's right. When survival cuts in, it's very hard to think about a higher level activity like where am I really supposed to be going with this thing. Okay.
So there's a fine balance, I think. Actually, there's a fine balance because you could always keep sitting on the cusp. But the point is that the business incubator at least keeps the activity ticking over, and when you can start to see real, sort of benefits of moving, you could at least have much shorter transition of 6 weeks, 2 months, rather than a year before cash generation could happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think at some point you do have to say, okay, I'm going to get on with this and burn the bridges. If you've always got a back door, then you'll never actually move forward because you always, it's like driving with one foot on the accelerator and one foot on the brake, and in first gear at the same time. Okay, you don't necessarily get very far.
Yep.
So at some point you do have to say, hey, but I would say test out the idea, get some people on board because first, there's no greater aphrodisiac than making a sale, I can tell you.
In terms of the joys, really you're creating something. It's almost like having your own baby.
Yeah, absolutely. And you watch this baby grow up and you watch this baby mature, and at some point you may sell the baby, well, metaphorically in this case.
No, but I see what you're saying. It is the same level of joy as you creating something.
Yeah.
Rashid, any final words before look, the insights have been wonderful. So thank you very much. Are there any final words from your side, Rashid?
Look, I would encourage people to go on the journey because you can. Life is full of risk. No matter what you do, life is full of risk. And the question is, do you want to have more or less control over your destiny? Okay. You can stay what you're doing, and you can always stay in your comfort zone. And at the end of your life, you may well be satisfied, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being an employee. There is nothing wrong with getting to the top of a corporation, being an employee. Nothing wrong with that at all. But there is a completely different set of challenges if you work for yourself and you start a business and you grow that business. And it comes down to, do you want to grow faster? The different directions. And if you want to do that, then yes, go into business, take that plunge, make something of it, because I think the rewards and the joy can be absolutely astronomical. That's what I would say to people.
No, that's great. Thank you very much, Rashid. It's been great, and I feel with the background that you have and the journey that I'm currently having, I'm sure we'll be having a lot more dialogues, and I'm sure we'll be hopefully we'll be helping others as they're heading down that path. But I just want to say thank you very, very much for what's been an insightful hour or so that we've had the discussion around.
Pleasure. Anytime, Ray.
Cheers.
So I would also suggest that if you're watching this thing, I know that Ray is starting an incubator with My Electrical Business for people. I would encourage people to contact you and say, how can you help me? Nurture, because you've been through this journey yourself, and my thing is always get help from people who've been on the journey.
Thanks, Rashid. I mean, my philosophy is that. Thanks, Rashid. My philosophy has been that I think a lot of what's happening in Australia is people are seeing jobs and working for a corporate as being the only avenue. And while there is mayhem happening in the market, I just want to be able to present the fact that there is another option.
Yes.
And that option has no more or less risks. It just comes down to how that's managed. But it is certainly an option. And I think Australia would do phenomenally well if there was a batch and a component of individuals that went out, they created their own businesses and created jobs. I think that would actually help a lot. So, I mean, you probably touched on a philosophy. The philosophy is to go out there and inspire. But then in terms of the tools, there are certainly other mechanisms through which the tools to get into business can be done. So
absolutely. I mean, if you look at, there's an interesting statistic. If you look at the turn of the 18th and 19th century, so the early 1900s, I think something like 90% of Australians were in business in some form.
Okay.
If you then go forward, to the beginning of the 20th century, it actually reverses. 90% of Australians are actually employed, and say 10% are in business. But if
Probably a lot less than that,
probably a lot less than that. If you look at the engine house of Australia, it is small business. It's not big corporations. It is small business. It's people like you and me that go out there and do something. Sometimes we employ people, sometimes we don't. But even if we don't employ people, we use contractors, we use other people to get things done, which is moving money around.
Absolutely, man.
So go and do it.
Cheers, Rashid. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Ray.